What's a widely accepted American norm that the rest of the world finds strange? Story 1. Taking your credit card away from you when you pay a restaurant bill. My European coworkers thought they were being ripped off when they first encountered this practice. In most countries, they bring the card reader to the table. Story 2. Heath insurance. It's weird that it's tied to employment, and it's even weirder that you still have to pay out of pocket for things, even when the insurance itself is super expensive. Story 3. I am American, but I wanted to add, saying the Pledge of Allegiance with our hands over our hearts and looking toward the flag was weird AF in retrospect. Every school morning for years I had to do that. Story 4. Weirdly, what I'm most fascinated about is the insanely large drinks they get to go and carry around. Huge bucket-sized sodas, and almost any other drink coming in huge containers. Even the milk and juice jugs are huge. Story 5. Claiming they are the most free country proud of freedom as a pillar of their society, but are nowhere near the top of indexes ranking international levels of freedom. Story 6. Americans discover the country is a tad bit dystopian. Oh man, I wish I could go to the doctor, but I got fired. Like WTF? People paid hundreds of billions of dollars to buy the president in the open, and that's just cool? Prison slavery? The death penalty? Secret little prisons to lock up people who the government can't prove are criminals? More prisoners than any other country on Earth despite the population. Cops are just allowed to murder people. They have tanks? Some people are just not paid enough and everyone has to chip in, but only if they're good? There are medicine commercials. That's insane. It's all insane. Story 7. Apparently, how much we smile at each other? It's usually the first thing I hear about from people who live elsewhere who come to visit, grew up in a tourist city. Americans smile too much. Story 8. HOA. What even is the purpose of a homeowners association? Why should someone else get to choose what color a house gets to be painted if they don't own it? Story 9. Being a follower of Jesus means voting for the party that steals from the poor. Not a blanket statement. I know many good folk who recognize this hypocrisy. Story 10. Hey OP. 48-year-old married father of 2 in the UK here. I've worked regularly with Americans, worked for an American company, and spent a good deal of time in America. I really do like America and its people. They're by and large optimistic, welcoming, and confident people. Really likable. I have noticed some cultural differences between the US and Europe. In the US, it seems to me that a person's status and perceived virtue is linked almost entirely to their net worth. Almost like wealth is equated with righteousness, if that makes sense. I, along with a lot of people I know, perceive people's value to be related to their contribution to society and their intelligence and how they use it. This may just be a personal opinion, but it's the biggest one I notice. Story 11. The North Korean level of pride. Flags everywhere. Pledge of Allegiance in school every morning. National anthem at every game. Only in dictatorships do you see that level of pride. Story 12. Accepting the Nazi salute. Most of my fellow Americans aren't taking this seriously enough at all. This litmus test is all we need to know how bad they're willing to let things get. Edit down, vote me all you want. Says a lot more about you and what you're willing to put up with. Story 13. The fact that the government can't do taxes for you automatically via your employer's payroll system always seems insane to me. Unless you're self-employed, nobody has their entire population have to do their taxes once a year. Like healthcare, the system seems set up to make you fail so they can come after you. Story 14. Completely changing course every 4 to 8 years and rolling back whatever the last person in charge achieved. For example, Biden invested about $100 billion into Ukraine, and now Trump is now about to surrender to Russia. So much money, material and lives went into this, and they are about to just throw it away. Story 15. Nearly unobtainable. Healthcare, no work-life balance, unhealthy foods that cause you harm, which leads you back to the whole healthcare thing. It's a trap. Story 16. The election system. Obviously, there is no perfect approach as we can see all over the world in these days. But the fact a person can be made king, be elected to be president, although the other candidate that it's basically just on is another story had more voters is hard to swallow. Also, if one thinks of the fact how many states with pre-existing preferences and the majority of citizens will be disregarded in order for the candidates to put all their attention to the swing states, including, nowadays, paying bribes. I mean, encourage voters by lotteries held by lunatic wealthy expats. Although I must say that way too many election systems count on the leaders to have a sense of morality, that they want to do what is best for the PPL. While we see that it prob required many more rules just in case a childish moron were able to take the throne and have his personal vendettas and act like a 3-year-old and stuff. Merely hypothetically speaking, of course. Story 17. Month, day, year as a date format. Currently, I'm working for a US company outside the States, so have to use this abomination of a system. It makes my little European brain hurt. Story 18, gun culture. I'm always amazed when I go to a bookstore and see how many different magazines about guns there are. I'm American, and I still think it's weird. Story 19, children's backpacks with bulletproof lining. Active shooter drills at school. Medical debt being the leading cause of bankruptcy. More privately owned guns than citizens. Pledging allegiance to the flag every day at school. Lots, really. Story 20, Kardashianism. Flaunting wealth, gluttony, etc. This type of behavior is found to be repulsive, disgusting, not something to be proud of in some parts of the world. For example, Scandinavian social norms is janteloven, jantelagen. How does jantelagen work? People should not brag about their accomplishments. People should not put themselves above others. People should not make fun of others. People should not think the world revolves around them. People should not act like they know more than others. Examples of jantelagen in Sweden. Some wealthy people in Sweden downplay their wealth to appear ordinary. For example, IKEA founder Ingvar Kamprad drives an old Volvo and wears rubber boots. Swedes tend to have a more reserved, minimalistic style of dress and interior design. People in other nations often view Americans as rude, uncouth buffoons, etc. because they brag too much, flaunt wealth, etc. Some Americans ignorantly think people are repulsed by them because they are jealous. But in reality, they are disgusted, repulsed, disliked, angry at them, like in the same way people are angry at pedos. They don't want to be like them. Instead, they find their behavior repulsive, disgusting instead. Many Americans don't understand the concept of jante. Story 21. Toilets with ridiculously high water levels close to the rim of the bowl. Absolutely nobody ever talks about this being a thing. The splashback was nightmarish, and you couldn't even prepare a TP landing raft due to the surface area and depth of the water. Ugh. Story 22, chiropractic. Just out there on every corner, like it's not a total scam. We already have medically recognized fields specializing in musculoskeletal disorders called orthopedics. Story 23. Aussie here? I would say school shootings. I can't get over not regulating guns. It's not taking away your freedom, it's giving more children a chance to have their own. Story 24. Hopefully there comes a day when we can focus on the fun, tiny differences in culture that we have with other countries. I'm American. I hope one day we finally get past the imperialism, school shootings, and hatred. Story 25. Lying and hate speech being protected speech. The U.S. First Amendment allows almost all speech, including hate speech, misinformation, and corporate influence in politics, which can harm democracy. Other countries like Germany, Canada, and the UK have laws limiting hate speech, false information, and media lies, making their systems more balanced. The U.S. prioritizes free speech too much, even when it spreads harm, while other democracies focus on protecting society and truth without silencing free expression. Story 26. 16 years old. Driving and not even having to take actual lessons. Their access to driving license is way too easy, even more so when you see the type of car they get for their first one. Who TF thought it was a good idea to let a teenager drive a pickup truck seriously? And then they wonder why there's so many teenage drivers dying while drunk. Story 27. Loads of salt and fat and food cheese butter on everything. Guns and school shootings. For-profit healthcare. Racism. Doing your own taxes. For-profit prison system. Tipping culture. Massive sizes of drinks dishes. Entitlement here and abroad. Story 28. Extremely idiotic, pretentious patriotism. Fundamentalist crazy Christianity. Voting a felon as president, all the while banging on about pretend Christian morality. Horrifically unjust treatment of disadvantaged people. Again, whilst pretending to be moral and Christian. Eating mostly canned, packaged, and unhealthy foods. Everyday use of paper, plastic, throwaway plates, and cutlery. Being uneducated, loudly and obnoxiously wrong. Story 29. Driving massive SUVs and trucks. Huge portions of food to feed our obese bodies. The ever-increasing inability to separate church and state. Our abysmal education system. I could go on and on. Story 30. The biggest upset for us was news. The way they are made, they almost look and sound like a fear-mongering science fiction movie, while we are used to very plain and simple news, without really any emotions or bias. A week of that was enough to exhaust me just because it feels so agenda-driven. And what's the point of the news if you just get a biased view of selected things? Story 31. Sugar and bread. The amount of sugar in everything is staggering, but the overall sweetness of the bread is a shock to the taste buds. For the longest time, I couldn't work out why a simple sandwich tasted so odd. Also on the topic of food, all the things called salad that are just mayonnaise-fueled concoctions, and don't get me started on what people in the Midwest call a salad. Story 32. Intentionally starving children, forcing 13-year-olds to give birth, going bankrupt if you break your ankle, proudly celebrating Nazi Christofascism. Story 33. The server taking your credit card to pay for the meal. In France, at least, you just get up when you're ready, head to the counter, and pay for your dinner. Don't worry, they'll remember which table you were at. Story 34. Jaywalking. Why do you hate me walking in your country? They disdain me in Alabama and hold me in virulent contempt in Tennessee. Your farmers are belligerent because they assume I'm going to commit petty larceny. You're the one with the gun, farmer friend. It's the most intense culture clash as a Romani I've ever experienced. What do you mean there is no right to roam? Your police do not like me at all. I'm lucky I wasn't deported for wandering in a country lane. Story 35. Is it just me, or did this whole thread turn into a cautionary tale for anyone who thought moving to the USA would be better than where they currently live? It's also a quick, easy explainer of why most of the folks who do move to the USA aren't from industrialized, wealthy countries, which in reality have a much better quality of life than any non-rich American could ever aspire to in the USA. Story 36. Slicing into the genitals of children for aesthetics or hygiene. The rest of the world. 1. Knows how to wash. 2. Don't care if daddy and son have matching genitals. 3. Don't think about how pretty our children's genitals are. Yeah, there's also religion reasons, but that insanity isn't USA only. Story 37. How far right the major two parties in the US are is many countries around the world, the Democrats would have a hard time joining the right major parties. Ignoring the hyper-far right, a lot of countries recently have had grow. Story 38. Lobbying being a thing, being the most expensive place in the world for education and healthcare, and being the richest country ever at the same time. Tipping culture. College sports. Story 39. Tipping culture. The amount of patriotism, the amount of conservatism, even among liberal people, e.g. fear of nudity. Too strong sense of absolutely right and absolutely wrong. Difficulty accepting different views. How the military is glorified. No minimum days off by law. Car culture. Story 40. Having a full conversation with a stranger. My friends from the UK thought it was funny that we would talk to strangers as if they were friends. Then, once the conversation is over, we just part ways. I've worked in retail for a good number of years, and the amount of one-off conversations I had with guests was staggering. Some people will spill their entire life stories, then dip right after. Story 41. As an American, the hands-down most bonkers thing about my country is how we still think of ourselves as rebel mavericks. But bristle like you took in our cheeseburger if you say maybe police officers should in any way be held accountable for illegal and oppressive conduct.